All right, thanks for joining me for another episode of Lessons in Loss, Love, and Resilience. I'm Arik Housley, and many of you know that the story that I lost my daughter in a mass shooting. And I spend these podcasts, joining other people who have gone through stages of grief, through moments of grief. And many times it's not losing a loved one, most of the time it is. Today, I have a guest to talk to that we have a lot in common and we talk a lot, but she actually has multiple things to talk about in terms of how her grief journey's gone and how that went for her. And I'm excited to have Tamara O'Neill on here. So, Tam, I appreciate you joining me today.
I'm excited to be here. Thank you. What an honor. I was reading through some of the excerpts about your book last night, and it just touched my heart. So, even though you're a little further along on your journey than I am, this grief journey, to your point in your writings, I don't know that it ever ends, right?
Right.
We have choices as we walk this journey and to embrace or to fight it, right? And I've done both,
Yeah.
still do both. But I love your candidness around that. And also, even yesterday when we were talking about this segment, you're taking the phone call and you're headed down to another university that's encountered significant grief and, trying to make a difference. So thank you for that journey. How did that go?
It was good. I mean, as you know, it's very fulfilling to help others in this. Like we've all gone through something and we'll go through it for the rest of our life, right? I mean, this doesn't end at any point. So it was nice to get down and be there and support that community. So I appreciate you asking. So, Tamara, why don't you tell us, like, I know the story, but why don't you tell the listeners, like, your story and how you and I know each other through.
Yeah. So I think I want to start a little non-traditionally, if that's okay. And because I'm a non-traditional kind of gal. So I need to start in order for people to understand the significance of my grief with understanding the amazing man that his name is Stephen called my husband, right? My husband and I had both been married before. We met each other walking on the beach very organically, right? And we would say, because we had been married before and divorced, we had kissed our fair share of toads, but he was the one, and I was the one for him. We showed up powerfully for each other through so many different things. He supported me, I supported him. He was literally a genius. He had the IQ of the genius, okay? And together, even he had children from a previous marriage, I did. Um, they all loved us both, right? Our friends, our colleagues, everyone said that we were better together. Like literally, we became better versions of ourselves, which, I realize that's a blessing because not everybody experiences that kind of love. So literally, that whole saying, you're the wind beneath my wings, my husband was. He really
Yeah.
was. And so we were both high performing professionals. He was a co owner of a jewelry manufacturing company and their CFO. And I was running multiple hotels for a hotel management company, overseeing over $100 million in assets and up to 200 people that were working for me, depending on the season, right? Because Rhode Island's very seasonal. So February 22nd of 2025, I got up in the morning, was getting ready. My husband was not working that day. I normally worked at least a half a day on Saturdays. And he was sitting in bed playing Sudoku, which he would normally do, and have his coffee. And I got ready for work and I came out and he did what he normally does. And he looked at me and he's like, ah, my beautiful wife, I love you so. And I know it sounds very kind of like Hallmarkish or fake, but that's really what happened. And I looked at my husband and I am like, I love you so much. Thank you. Because he had this way of making me feel like the most beautiful woman in the world, like so cared for, so valued. So went to work and we were going to be meeting his middle son, wife, and three children for an outing that afternoon at a local like arcade for the kids and have lunch. So about 2 o'clock in the afternoon, I came home from work and, I came in and the house was quiet and I knew instantly that something was wrong. And my husband, he'd lost a lot of weight. He wasn't doing well, but of course he fought it. He went to the doctor, they didn't find anything. And I was the pain in the buddy wife insisting that something was wrong. But I basically finally decided, okay, I'm wrong. I'm just being a pain. Well, that day when I walked in and it was very quiet and his newspaper was untouched, I called for him and he didn't respond. I knew something was wrong. So I went upstairs and unfortunately I found that my husband had had a massive heart attack while running on the treadmill. And because he was a runner. He ran like 5 to 6 days a week, 5 to 6 miles, right? And so instantly my world was changed, right? And I've had a lot of loss, to your point, in my life. I'd lost my father when I was 14. I'd lost my stepfather only a couple of years before. I'd lost my brother when he was 49, right? My older brother, and so I had, grandparents, uncles, you name it. And I've always been kind of the strong one when going through that kind of thing. I show up for other people, but it was completely different when I lost my
Well, because he was such a, from the sounds of it, he obviously was such a big part of you and you him. It's just a different piece. I mean, in losing Elena, I've turned to people who I know and a couple that I've had on the podcast that I say, gosh, I don't know how I would have done this if I had lost Hannah. Hannah and I are very much like you and Stephen were, in the sense that, like of the way that we're just, connected in that way, that kind of soulmate piece. And so I was like, gosh, I couldn't imagine trying to do this without her. Like when I have my down days, I have her to turn to. And so, yeah, it's just such a big piece of you.
It is.
Yeah,
No,
no,
and
I
I
can
think,
imagine.
no, thank you for that. And like you and I, when we originally spoke and we got connected, I don't remember who connected us, but we just
I don't
instantly
either.
like became friends, right? I just so admire what you do. And I'm like, I think the only thing worse than what I've gone through is losing a child. And you're like, I think what you went through was worse. And I'm like, no, I think I'm like, it just,
Yeah.
but I will tell you that, you know, I, I had never known loss like that. And I've lost so much. Like I literally, I saw my father, unfortunately he took his life and I was in the house when he did it. So it was pretty traumatic, right? But that, believe it or not, was not as impactful in terms of the deep grief that I went through with Stephen. So, as I walked the journey, I'm a performer. So, I immediately, I was working, which is what I normally would do, right? I would go help like my mom with the funeral arrangements or what have you when that happened. And then I would come home and just work and I would be doing my stuff in between, getting the arrangements done, showing up for people. I might do a little bit of crying and, it was totally different with Stephen. Even though I worked the first 2 weeks remotely, I didn't go into the hotels. The only day I didn't work in some capacity was the day of his funeral, right?
Wow.
But in April,
So
that
even
was,
like even like 3 days after, like you were still going.
I was on my email. I was, right. I was working because it's the way that I coped. But then in April, I went down to Florida because he and I had closed on a house just 2 weeks before he passed, right? And that was supposed to be chapter two. And I went down there and it just dawned on me chapter two was never going to happen, right? And so I told myself I wouldn't get emotional on this, right? But it's still, I'm over a year past it. And I still certainly have my moments. So
You're
anyway, I
never
went
going to
down
be
there. I'm like,
past it.
oh, I'm
You're
never
never
getting
going to be
past it.
past it, right? Like this is something you carry with you. And it's funny, like I use it.
Mm,
I spoke about it yesterday at the school I was at, and I was like, look, this is a beach ball you're going to carry. And so for you, after Stephen's death, those days you were just stuffing that underwater, holding it under, which takes a lot more energy.
it
And you're
does.
holding this under there going like, okay, I need to work, like this will help me like take my mind off of it, except you still own this. So when you lose that balance and it pops up, you have to take the time to carry this and take the time to feel it and to be with it, and because you're carrying it for the rest of your life now, right?
It's
And I
so
think the
true.
thing is in this scenario, and that actually leads into the next portion for you in is that you then have now it's the calm after the storm. You've had the burial. Everybody kind of goes back to their normalcy, and now what? You're in Florida,
Well,
and
so I'm working, working every day. I'm coming home at night. Like the thing is that my team, I'm not big on, I think most leaders, because I'm going to approach this from not just a humanistic perspective, from a leader's perspective, right? From a lens of overseeing people. And I'm a charismatic, transformational servant leader. Those are the leadership styles that I embrace that helped me to just bring teams to high performing, award winning, quite honestly. For that company, I was general manager of the year. My hotel was hotel of the year. Like my hotels performed at levels that they hadn't seen before. And that was because I embraced that, my people. Those very people that embrace those leadership styles, I've come to realize are the ones that are impacted the most by grief because we love the deepest, right? We do. And so what I would find is I'd go to work. My team would kind of know if it was a rough day. I'd have my glasses on because I had cried so much the night before I couldn't wear my contacts. So even though I didn't cry at work, I would cry at home. Sometimes I'd cry going into work. And then when I would come home to my empty house, because my husband and I had a routine of talking about our day, about running businesses and struggles and wins and all of those things. And if I had a rough day or I had a win, I had nobody to talk to, right? And because the kids are grown, everybody's out, and that was a godsend on some levels, because when I say I was on my knees at times crying and begging for my husband to come back. It wasn't pretty. And we'll talk about, I actually, in the book that we'll talk about later, I do a pretty raw account of that, because I think people need to, if they haven't experienced, need to understand what it is to grieve like that.
Right.
And those that have grieved like that, they need to know, I'm seen, I'm heard, it happens, it's real, right? So when I went to Florida, I went with one of my friends, Jamie, just a sweetheart, and she went there knowing that it was probably not going to be pretty, right? She knows me, right? And so everywhere I went, I was crying. Like, we went out to eat, and there was a plaza right next door, and there was music. And my husband, which nobody believes me because he was such a business guy, but with me, he was different. If we had music outside, I'd be like, baby, come dance with me. And he would dance right there. It didn't matter where we were. And so here I am in this plaza, and there's this music being piped in, and there in the middle of everyone, I broke down, Arik. I started crying uncontrollably because even though I was doing it at home, I wasn't doing this publicly, right?
Yeah.
I went to the river's edge and I was crying. She came in, bless her heart. In my mind, I'm thinking this one's got to be embarrassed, but she wasn't. She just like embraced me. And we just stood in the middle of this plaza with me just bawling, right? And and I had several situations like that while I was down there. And that's what made me realize I'm not okay. I wasn't eating. I wasn't sleeping. My doctor was telling me, you need to take time off. I'll write you a note, right? You're not well. I
Mm-hmm.
had to go to the eye doctor because I cried so much. I literally cried. I've got a contact in this eye. She's like, you've literally cried so much. You have worn the protective coating off from your cornea.
Yeah.
I cracked a crown. Like, it was crazy. So I'm like, I clearly need to do something. I'm not okay. So I contacted my immediate boss, who was a sweetheart, and I explained to him, I'm like, Rob, I'm like, and he knew my pain because he knew how much I love my husband. People at my work knew my husband. He came to our holiday party, right? And I was on the phone with my boss when I walked in the house before I found my husband. I wasn't on the phone with him when I found him, but literally 5 minutes before I found my husband. And I
Right.
ended up calling him right after. He was a sweetheart. And he's like, Tam, I totally get it. He goes, I don't know what I would do if I lost my wife. He's like, we've got you, we got your back, right? I'm like, that's fantastic. I'm sorry. I know the team's relying on me, but in order for me to be the leader that I want to be, I know I need to take the time to grieve because I'm not the same. And so, one of the conversations that I had with a team member when I was down there is like, Tam, we haven't heard from you in a couple of days. And I'm like, just trying to lay low. He goes, we're so used to you being everywhere, and no matter where you are, whether you're on vacation or whatever, you're checking in, you're everywhere.
Yeah.
And I just couldn't be that person. So Rob got it, and he's like, okay, well, we got you. Unfortunately, when he spoke to his boss, the corporate team said, no, if you want to take 2 weeks off, you'll have your hotels and your teams. But if you want to take 6 to 8 weeks, which is my doctor was recommending that, they're like, we'll have a job for you, but you won't have your teams when you come back.
Yeah.
So what that did was it created this, talk about identity crisis, right? You've lost your husband, right? The person who was my biggest supporter. And then I lost my teams, right? And so when I was out, I was, and this is something I want to say to people listening to this, support is so important. I had so many wonderful friends and family that reached out consistently. But I also engaged in a grief coach. There's grief counseling, there's grief coaches. I had worked with her on some personal and professional things before. And I called her and I'm like, Kathy, I'm not going to be able to do this by myself. I'm going to need to navigate this with someone's help. And she did. And so she had me journalizing every day, which I hate to journalize, Eric. I'm not a journalizer, but I did. I started journalizing, which was helpful. And then she helped me identify like what were some of the things that I wanted to make sure I accomplished through this grieving journey, right? And she made herself available. So when I'd have the uglies, right? That's what I called
Yeah.
the uglies because there was nothing pretty about it. It was raw. Because literally, I would cry sometimes that my heart hurt. Like literally, like I felt like my heart was going to come out of my chest. Right?
Hmm.
My throat would feel like it was like shutting up. Like these physical symptoms. I couldn't remember things. All of these other things, right? That impact. So as I'm journalizing, reluctantly, I start realizing, what I'm going through at work, and then my team expressing like they weren't they weren't okay with the fact they weren't okay with the way that it was handled. Even though I, said to them, we have to do what's best for the property, for you. We've got to make sure there's stability. I'm trying to communicate that internally. I'm like, this doesn't make sense, right? And so one of my reports said, Tam, while you were out grieving your husband, we were grieving losing you. So that's another layer of grief, right?
Right.
As I start journalizing, and I've published a couple of case studies with Dr. Coakley at a Bryant University on leadership, being committed to excellence, accountability, and all of that. I reached out to her and I said, I think I want to do a case study on this whole grief thing and how it impacts the workplace. Because I realized as I did the research, Eric, that there's so many examples of organizations that don't get this right. And there's all kinds of examples out there of leaders, high level leaders. Tim Cook, when Steve Jobs, right? He's documented his difficulty that he experienced, right, after losing him. And, Sheryl Sandberg in terms of, Facebook, when she lost her significant, how that impacted her cognitively, her ability to reason, and physically how it impacted her. So I'm reading all of this and I'm like, so what I'm going through is normal because I felt like it wasn't because I hadn't gone through this before. I'm like, I'm doing this wrong. Kathy kept saying, you're not doing it wrong. And what I also realized is that because I allowed myself the time to grieve, Eric, I do believe there's things that I didn't grieve in the past that I grieved. Does that make
Yeah.
sense?
Yeah.
So it hit me.
Well, and really, when you were, I mean, when you were calling it the uglies, I mean, I tried to explain to somebody the other day, I go, in many ways, this is also the amount of love that you're realizing you've had and you've lost in that way, right?
Yes.
That you're like, man, I loved him so deeply that this is that you and now you look, and I turn to somebody when, people have asked, and I said, look, it's not real for the dark road of why to turn and go, why did this happen? What if we did something different? I would do anything to get her back. Well, of course I would do anything to get her back, but that's not real, right?
It's
And in
not.
the end, you just look and go, man, I feel so blessed with the time that I had. Does it suck that it was cut short? Absolutely. It's painful. Yet I feel so fortunate in the time that I had because that love was so deep, right? And that I think you experienced that not only in the way you describe Stephen, but in your relationship, but also the way that you were grieving that process.
It's so true. And I've said this multiple times to my friends. I'm like, I have learned that when you love deeply, you grieve deeply. And Eric, I wouldn't give it up for it. I'd grieve
Right.
all over again, if I had to. I mean, I'd love for the outcome to be different. I would have loved to have been spending another 10, 20, 30 years with my
Yeah.
husband,
Of
honestly.
course.
That was his plan because he was like, so you're right. When you grieve deeply, when you love deeply, you grieve deeply. But it's funny because I remember saying to my two best friends when I was trying to get myself into a better place, right? And I remember saying to them, some people will never know the deep love that Steve and I encountered, the kind of relationship we had. Both of them said to me, Tam, we haven't seen, we don't know that kind of love. And I was like, oh, and it made me realize that's how rare that kind of love is and what a blessing it is, to your point, right? And so as I was, going through the process and I was doing this research, I had said to a number of my friends, I won't grieve this hard without being able to have positive impact. I am
Right.
not going to go through this without having, and that's not for everyone, right? I get that. But for me, I'm that kind of person. Like I have to find some kind of purpose in it. So as I was going through the process and doing the research, and I'm like, there's nothing in FMLA for anybody that's grieving, really. You get FMLA if you're sick, which I was becoming ill, which is the only reason I would have had job protection, or if you're caring for someone that's sick. But if it's grief, there's nothing in there. There is no real support in place for people. And as I was looking at it, the people that are the ones that are leaders, that are overseeing and are supposed to be the strength for those around them. If you're a good leader, that's who you are. That's why my book, Who Holds the Leader, that's the title, Who Holds Leader, because what I found through the process as I was doing all this research, there's not a model out there for organizations to utilize,
Right.
right? To support the leader. And if the leader is supported, then the team is supported and the organization is supported,
Right.
right? But a lot
Right.
of times organizations might think, well, somebody's trying to take advantage. That's why they're taking FMLA, or they don't understand the process, right? When in reality, if you handle that process right, because I actually, I found several examples of organizations that did it well,
Hmm.
but more often there was a link that was missing and documentation and or commentary on when it wasn't handled. And what happens is trust is impacted, right?
Right.
It's not unlike any other relationship that you have. And a lot of times we want to make that different. Work
Hmm.
relationships professionally, obviously, there's things you do at work that and things you do at home that they need to be separate. I understand that. But relationships are relationships and they're predicated on trust. And when trust is broken, it negatively impacts the relationship.
Right.
And that's what happens a lot of times when people aren't supported through grief
Right.
and they don't have a commitment to the organization.
Right.
So as I was looking through all of this, I decided, ended up like my colleague is like, okay, you want to do a case study on it. So I want you to guest lecture in my class because I guest lecture on being committed to excellence, accountability, high energy stuff, and I love it. Giving back to several here in Rhode Island universities. And she's like, I want you to do it on grief, and I'm like, I'm not doing it on grief.
Yeah.
I'm like, I don't think I can do that, right? And she's like, you need to do it. You said you want to write a case study. This is going to help you get there. Because she knew I needed a kick in the pants, right? And so, oh my word, Arik, I wrote it. And I don't know how you did the first time you wrote your presentation, because I take it very seriously when I do a presentation because it's people's time and so forth. It took me 3 weeks and I cried. Like, I can't even tell you how cathartic it was,
Yeah.
right? You know what I'm talking about.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So, and then I get there the day and I'm like, these kids, these are traditional students. These are not non-traditional students, right? Like I was a non-traditional student when I got my degree. My undergraduate and my master's were both non-traditional. Like these are like 21, 22-year-olds. They're not going to want to hear my story on grief, right? And she's like, I think you'd be surprised. So normally when I do a lecture, I keep people engaged, but you always have one or two that are on their phone or not really paying attention or whatever, always. This lecture, not one of the kids was on their phone. And normally when the class is over, people are up and they're leaving. I ran over and they all stayed seated. There were people that had tears. There were people that came up to me afterwards to share their story. They're like, we need this discussed in leadership. I'm like,
Right.
you are future leaders. You're the ones that are going to be able to bring this forward, right? And I was mentoring a young woman afterwards because I try to do that each year, a woman in leadership at Bryant University. I was meeting with her and a young man came up to me and he's like, Tam, can I speak to you? And he goes, I hate to interrupt. And I'm like, absolutely. And he's like, you really spoke to me. And I'm like, how did I speak to you? He's like, well, I just recently came out as a gay man. And I'm like, so did you lose relationships? And he's like, I don't know if I'm going to lose them, but they're changed forever. So I'm grieving the relationships I had with my family and with some of the people that were close to my family. And he just started crying, right? And it was in that moment with after that lecture between the kids reaching out to me, young adults, right? They're kids to me. And when I did a post on LinkedIn about it, and the private messaging I got of people saying, thank you for bringing this up, right, on this business forum, so to speak, right? And I'm like, this is a message that needs to be delivered. So that's what prompted me into writing a model that could potentially be utilized in organizations to help navigate
Yeah.
grief, right?
Well, I mean, you went through, which makes sense of why you did it, because I mean, you were grieving the loss of your husband, and at the same time, based on the way that you describe yourself as a leader, this you also lost your teams because you were trying to take care of yourself with self-care that was needed. And then so now you lose the one piece that you're finding joy in, right? So now you've lost two in a matter of 2 months. And now you have to look at how do I navigate this new space, and it's just not that easy. And I think ironically, yes, I've been surprised every time I speak. I'm amazed at how many are like a pin drop in the room where I'm looking at it going, I would just expect so different from the younger generation. So whether it's older people or younger people, I mean, when I went to a continuation high school one time and I left thinking, I don't know how well that went. And the principal walked up and said, Arik, I've never had these kids not on their phones or not just talking. She goes, you could have heard a pin drop in the place. And I'm thinking, wow, like, so it's really a topic that is necessary. And then secondarily, in the workplace and in just humanity and in our relationships, understanding how to communicate and do all these things. So the concept of you building a model that would help in the workplace is awesome, because one of my friends that was on the podcast, Jason, before, he said that he was with a big telecom company, and the CEO approached him and said, you know, can we have coffee? And he just checked in with him. How are you? And he goes, and that meant so much to me that he just took the time. And a year later, he did it again. Well, now you're taking that and going, okay, that's from an employee from the top down. Well, what happens when it's the top? Like,
Mm-hmm.
what happens when the president or the vice president or the C-suite type person is now dealing with grief, and how do you cover, and how long do you cover, and what's the process and all? So you mentioned it's called the care model. And so
Yes.
your book is called
Who holds the leader?
Who Holds the Leader? I
Yes.
I was about to say who holds the lead? Who holds the leader?
Yeah.
And then the model is called the care model that you've developed. So what is the care model?
So the care model, and it is copywritten, it's it's the four hallmarks of this program. And I've got myself some notes here so I stay on task here, because otherwise we'll run out of time. You know that, right? So it's
Oh, good.
C for communicate early and clearly, right?
Okay.
Silence creates fear, whereas communication, it creates safety. We know this. You talk about this in your, I've gone through and watched a lot of your podcasts now, right? And you do a great job of explaining that. You don't have to be silent, right? We're so often walking on eggshells, people, like, I want to pretend it didn't happen. And when you don't acknowledge that there's something going on, you create this void, and it's not a positive one. And we know from a leadership perspective that whenever there's gaps, people fill in those gaps with their own story, right? Which isn't good, right? And so that communication goes both ways, right? It's not just, or three ways if you want to say it. So it's the organization to the leader back to the organization, and then
Right.
what the team is communicating to the on-property team or the business team. That shows unity and builds trust, right? So the A part is assign support, don't assume capacity. So in the research that I did and what would have been helpful for me, because keep in mind, not everyone is going to have to take 6 to 8 weeks off, right?
Right.
I
Right.
never had to before Stephen passed. I took a couple of days off and I was right back at it.
Yeah.
Me jumping right back into something was my way of coping, right? This was different for me. I knew, because I was such an engaged leader and this was so impactful, I needed to take that time. So communicating between the leader and, every leader has someone above them, unless it's a small company. Okay. They've got a board of directors and they've got somebody above them.
Right.
Having someone that they can speak to where they can talk about what is my next step? Who's going to assume some of this? Because most of us that are leading large organizations, you're not working the traditional 8 hour a day. I was
Right.
working 12 to 18 hours a day, 6 to 7 days a week, depending on the season, right? So maybe it isn't you take 6 to 8 weeks off like I did. I took 7 weeks. Maybe it's that you need a lesser work day, but you assign responsibilities. So you have somebody in a task force from another property or another sister company that can come help out. Do you have bench talent that can jump in? Assessing, okay, well, we've got somebody who's strong organizationally here, but who's going to take care of the HR side of things, the
Hmm.
softer things, and maybe somebody just checks in weekly.
Hmm.
Those kind of things, even you like shaking your head, these are not complicated things, but this is not what people do. But if they did, think about how easy it is for the leader to go out, right, and feel like they're supported, because a good leader wants to know their people supported. And then having that communication while they're out, little pieces, not just dead silence. Okay. And
Well,
then
and
the
I think
reiteration.
not, and sorry not to interrupt, but I mean, because we're still good on time, don't worry. But the really much of the system is built around the fact that we're assuming people will take advantage, take time off, like vacation and sick pay. Is if you, at least in California, it's I think every 32 hours you get an hour of like time. So technically, someone could, if your system is for every 32 hours you get an hour, but it can accumulate and then cap. Well, then somebody could go wait 2.5 months, call in sick a day, wait another 2.5 months, call in sick another day, wait another 2.5 months, call in sick another day. So in the end, they could get like 7.5 days of sick time.
Mhm.
Or you give them 3 days on January 1 and they get 3 days no matter what. If they quit on January 1, they still get those 3 sick days. Well, when you sit down and have those conversations with HR, frequently they're like, well, which one would we rather do? What if somebody quits on January 3rd and they take advantage? Or what if, and I think in the end, very few people are actually taking advantage of the system in that way. So when you're talking about the leader role and go, well, they're going to be, what if they take advantage of this and go, I'm gone for 4 months or I'm gone for, well, how often does that really happen? Versus
Exactly.
giving them the time that they need and then setting up a system that, yeah, it took 7 weeks. But if they look back and go, like, but man, with the hours Tam was putting in, she was well, like, I mean, we just need to make sure that the business doesn't fall, right?
Exactly. It's protecting the business, protecting leader, because think about the intrinsic. I ended up leaving the organization, right?
Yeah, I
Think
could
about the
imagine.
intrinsic knowledge that they lost, right? And I'm not just talking about me patting myself on the back. I'm talking about any leader. If you've got a leader that's performing for you, believe me, I'm in the staffing industry now. I'm a partner and vice president of Edgeson Staffing, right? Getting good talent is hard today. So when you have it, you want to protect that and you want to protect your culture. You want people to want to work with you, right? And so for most leaders, for me, well, take my vacation time. That's okay, 2 weeks. And then don't pay me for the rest if you don't want. That was okay. I was prepared for that. And that's exactly what happened. Is that whatever I had in vacation and sick time and all of that got used first. So I think that was like 3 or 4 weeks. I don't remember. I think it was around 3 or 4 weeks. And then I had to take a couple of weeks off without pay, right? I was prepared to do that because I needed to do that, because I knew that I needed to do the work now so that in the end I would be okay, right? It's that proverbial pay me now or pay me later and pay me ongoing, 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 right? And I will tell you that through this process, I have gotten stronger. But even in the book, I write about, there's pieces there that talks about the organizations, responsibility in this and opportunities for organizational, but it also talks about the leaders' responsibility in this as well. So when you get to the R portion of the care, the reintegration, right, is a process. It's not a moment. So what's interesting is, like in my situation, I went out, so I grieved losing my teams, and it was hard, right? Because they were so much a part of my identity. I didn't even realize how much a part of it my identity were. They didn't fill the role. And I was already interviewing with this other company that was wonderful, the one I'm working for right now, because I'm like, I don't know if I was going back to, right? I didn't know if I was going to have to travel for it, if I was going to be here in Rhode Island. I had no idea, right? And so, or if it would be anything that they would really want me to. The way I was treated, I felt like they're probably going to want to push me out. So I'm a single unit. I need to make sure that I'm protected as well. So they were talking to me, they interviewed me, and it was like sitting down with friends. And they're like, oh my goodness, Tam, this is awful. We want you to be okay. You decide what you want to do. When the company, if they call you back, if you decide you want to stay with them, we understand. If you want to come with us, we want you. I'm like, I want to be able to give back. They're like, we don't have that program. You can start that program. I mean, they were just amazing. And they're like, if you want to start in August, start in August. If you want to start in October, that's fine. If you need to wait until January, we'll wait till January for you because you're part of our long-term strategy. See the
Yeah.
difference, right?
Yeah.
Huge.
Yeah.
So I'm like, huh. But I'm a very loyal person. So they called me and they were like, we didn't fill the position. And I said, well, I'm sorry to hear that. But they didn't call me at all while I was out. Nobody checked on me. Nobody like let me know how the hotels were doing. If the hotel, anyone at the hotel called me, they got spanked on the hand, right? Because they didn't want to violate. They weren't sure. I want to make it clear this isn't a bad company. They did not know how to navigate this.
Right.
They're
Right.
thinking legally, if they call her, does that mean she's still working? And they just didn't know, right? It's ignorance isn't always bliss, okay?
Well, and I refer to it a lot is it's understanding the difference between privacy and isolation. They're trying to give you the privacy and the time that you need, and you're feeling isolated in some ways, and some of it was needed, right? But a lot of people just get there's just such a difference, right? And again, no fault of their own other than the fact that this was just a totally unique experience that is happening more than people realize,
It does
right?
all and actually, it's so interesting. You and I've talked about this. I write about it in the book. It's not if, it's when it happens. Grief is going to, because grief isn't just the loss of a person. It's not the loss of a pet. Those are very devastating. It's the loss of a job. It's the loss of a relationship. It's the loss of the ability to play a sport, a scholarship. We could go on and on, a home, right? There's so many things that have different value points to people. So what's significant to me may not be to you, right? And that's why in the care model, when we talk about reintegration, there's a variety of ways to do that. It's talking to, really assessing with the leader and the team, what is needed. So if you gave temporary support, so when they come back, do you just dump everything on their lap? Well, that's not successful typically, right? The studies tell us that. So like in my case, when I went back, when they called me and they're like, Tim, we're in trouble. We need to get ready for the season. We're not ready. Can you at least help us get ready? So I went back for 2 months while they continued looking for a general manager. The problem is they didn't tell the team that I wasn't coming back for good. So when I came back, the team didn't know it was temporarily. And then on top of that, they were angry, the team, because they weren't cared for while I was gone. And they weren't mad at me. But at one point I had to sit them down and say, all right, you guys, my department heads are like, what's going on here? I'm like, you guys seem angry. And they're like, we're angry we didn't get support. I'm like, are you angry at me? I'm like, because they're like, for the last 7 weeks, we haven't had support. I'm like, the only thing that's been missing is I haven't been here, but you did have, and the problem is that the person that they had 12 other properties and didn't even sit at the property, this
Right.
particular hotel. So he couldn't support it. It was a capacity issue.
Right.
So they felt unsupported. They were missing me. And so there was all this dynamic that went on around it, which again, further emphasized why I need to try this care model, right? And then what I found is from a corporate level, they instantly moved into, like they had been before when Stephen first passed, had been so supportive, the flowers coming to the way. I was like, oh my goodness. But when I went back, because things weren't done while I was out, it was like, why isn't this done? Why isn't that done? And I was back to working the 18 hours a day and feeling like I was paying for what hadn't been done while I was out grieving my husband. So I would come home at night and he wasn't here to support me after that. And I was just like, I'm like, I'm going to tell you right now, Eric, I was like, oh my word, I wish I'd never even gone back, right? And
Yeah.
I'm glad I did. And I'm glad I worked through that process with the team because it helped me solidify the need for us to do better. We can
Yeah.
do so much better as
Yeah.
organizations. And then, the E portion of the care model is to ensure emotional safety for all, which is a nice way of kind of wrapping up what we were just talking about.
Yeah.
Doing that check-in does the team feel like they're not supported? How are they feeling? Like I said, for us to pretend that, they aren't missing the leader is unfortunate. But beyond that, they knew my husband.
Right.
Like he had just been there too, that we had our holiday party in January because in hotels you normally don't do it in December because you're busy then, right? They had just seen my husband and he was part of our holiday celebration just a few weeks before. So when organizations want to pretend that this doesn't exist, it takes the humanity out of the very people that we're working with. It's interesting because in one of my lectures that I do, there's a study that talks about the three hallmarks, if you will, to performance. Leaders impact emotions, emotions impact people, people impact results. It's that simple, right? And again, we may want to overcomplicate it, but when we're not understanding the emotional component of our team members and our leaders, we miss so many opportunities.
Right. Right. I mean, and you really see it. And I think the thing is it doesn't, I mean, I was in the same boat. The difference was is all of my businesses are small businesses. So they were able to cover, but it was
And you
hard for
own
me.
those, right?
What's that?
You own those, right? They were your own
Yeah.
businesses.
Yeah. So I'm the only one that like that. So fortunately, I had some good people that helped cover for me while I was gone, but it never fully recovered from me being because there was a part of me that was missing when I tried to go back. And I think ultimately when we find ourselves in these pieces, it's really understanding the emotional components that go with it. And I think imagine, I mean, you've obviously imagined it, is you have a team that your energy and your leadership style is many times carrying them and you're leading by example. And when that goes away for a long period, it was probably festering, right? And not because the company was doing their best to try to hold the space for you, even though they said that we can't because they didn't know how to do it or whatever. But then you come back and that team, like, it's not the same. It's just not, like, it's really hard to go back and have that energy and that compassion and all those things that you want to do because you were the type of leader, I would assume, that's also you were caring for them, you were checking in on them, you were doing all those things.
Always,
So yeah,
always.
and so it's such a loss of somebody. So when you have that type of culture that you're building in your organization, how do you protect that culture? Because that's actually even more than protecting the individual, you're protecting the culture. And by doing that, you're protecting the individual and the other individuals as well. And
That
it's, yeah,
is,
it's very difficult.
yeah, 100%, 100% accurate, Eric. It's all about culture. And when I was typically and I've done this my entire career, is go into hotels and businesses that are underperforming and evaluate, why they're underperforming and help fix them. Normally, it's rooted in leadership, lack of solid leadership, right? And then trust, which we talked about before, the lack of trust. And when you build that trust and you give solid leadership, teams thrive. Like our guest service scores it's really interesting during the time that I was out, because we in hotels, those online reviews matter to us. Okay. So talk to them before you give them a bad review. But we had grown our online presence and our reviews to, I forget what it was, like 4.3 was the high. I think the month that I went out, when I came back, the guest service scores were at 2.9.
Oof.
Yeah.
Yeah.
In 7 weeks. Okay. The culture had taken a nosedive because of
Right.
exactly what you're talking about. Culture matters. So
Yeah.
if it had been handled differently, all of those metrics would not have taken the dive. You have an opportunity then for leadership to come in and say, we got this. We got you and we got her. So we're going to rally and we can continue the momentum even though it's different. Does that make
Right.
sense?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, I just got back from a conference not long ago in Dallas, and I went to the Omni Hotel near the Star in the city, and or the Star, and the staff and the service were so outgoing that I actually reached out to them and I said, I just want to say, like, your front desk people were like so outgoing. Like, even though things weren't quite as ready as they were supposed to be, like, they were like, we're going to take care of it. We're going to move, we're going to do this. And then they checked back in on me. And I mean, and I wasn't worried about it at all. Like, I was running into a conference anyway. So I was just dropping stuff, but they were like, we're going to move you here. And I mean, you could tell that the front desk, like right when you got there, the guy at the front door that opened the door, you could just tell that somebody cared about them because
Yes.
their energy was so good. And that was the
Together.
first time. I mean, I've been traveling quite a bit lately doing the speaking and stuff. And when I have, that was the first time I've seen that in a long time. Like, I mean, it was just, you could really tell. So I sent a message, like I did a Google review, but then I sent a message because I said, usually people just say something if they want to complain. But I got to be honest, like everything, whoever's in charge is got, like Jordan and all these different Melissa and all of them that were there, they were awesome.
I love
And,
that. And I love that
it
you
was,
shared it, right? It's paying it forward. You can pay it
yeah,
forward just by being nice. And that's what I
yeah,
say to my teens. Like again, you hear me say this a lot. We overcomplicate it. Just be nice, right?
yeah.
If we can just be nice, that's hospitality. But we overcomplicate it. And honestly, today, it's more difficult than ever just to find people that are just going to genuinely and authentically be kind, nice, and go above and beyond. So good for you for acknowledging that.
Yeah, well, I mean, fortunately, you're seeing it's nice when you do see it that it really does stand out so much more. I mean, in the Napa Valley, it's hospitality, it's food, wine, and hospitality, right? So
Sure.
when we leave, and even post COVID, we've seen a huge change. Some of the top servers just said, you know what, I'm done, and they moved to an area where they could afford to live and have a home and everything because it's very expensive to live here. And you
Sure.
can see a big difference. You can see it in the hotels and restaurants where you're like, man, the service is not what it used to be. If I'm dropping $300 for dinner, kind of feel like I should.
You should at least be nice. And that's what I say. And that's the other message we can give here besides grief is that if you want a competitive advantage today, be nice. It actually
Yes.
gives you that competitive advantage.
Yeah. Yeah. And
Fine.
even when they're not nice, kill them with kindness, and you'd be
Yes.
surprised of how many people you flip in that way. So, well, Tam, I really appreciate you coming on. I love the fact that we had a chance to kind of talk about,
Me too.
sadly, your story, because I wish that wasn't why we were on here, but the fact that, understanding how it works into the workplace as well and affects the workplace. Your book, Who Holds the Leader, is released on digital, but it's coming out soon, or is that
It's
correct?
being released on digital this week. Today is April the 15th, okay, 2026. And we're hoping it's going to be out on Kindle and digital within the next day or two. And then within a couple of weeks, it's going to be out in print. And then within 2 to 3 months, it'll be out on Audible.
Nice. Well, I mean, by the time we get this and I do all the editing and make me look like I have hair and stuff, it'll already be at least out on the Kindle version. So, because it'll be a couple days before we post this, but I really appreciate you coming on and the time we had, and look forward to speaking again in the future.
Absolutely. I look forward to working with you, Eric, and thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you.